Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today we are going to rewrite the biography of the human species. If you close your eyes and picture the dawn of humanity, you almost certainly see the same thing I do. You see a golden, sun-drenched landscape. Tall, dry grasses swaying in the breeze, a few scattered acacia trees, and a group of hairless apes standing upright, squinting against the harsh equatorial sun. This is the Savannah Hypothesis. It is the story that has been told in textbooks, museums, and documentaries for a century. It tells us that we became human because we left the trees. It says that the harsh, open plains forced us to stand up to see predators, forced us to sweat to cool down, and forced us to invent tools to butcher meat. It is a compelling, cinematic story. But today, we are going to look at why that story is wrong. In fact, it might be fundamentally misleading. Over the last 2 decades, a quiet revolution has been happening in archaeology, specifically in places where we didn't think to look, the deep, dark, dripping interiors of the tropical rainforests. From the jungles of West Africa to the caves of Sri Lanka, we are finding evidence that humans didn't just survive on the open plains. We were masters of the canopy. We are discovering that our ancestors were not just refugees from the forest, but specialized rainforest hominins, who conquered the most challenging environments on Earth long before we built cities. So buckle up, because we are going deep into the Green Cradle to explore the myth of the golden grass and the reality of our jungle origins. To understand why this new evidence is so shocking, we have to understand just how dominant the Savannah Hypothesis has been. Since the 1920s, when Raymond Dart discovered the famous Tong child fossil in South Africa, we have assumed that the cradle of humanity was arid. The logic seemed bulletproof. Why did we walk on 2 legs? To cover long distances between food sources in the open. Why did we lose our fur? To prevent overheating in a place with no shade. Why did we make stone tools? To defend against lions and cut up antelope. For decades, anthropologists looked at the rainforest and saw what they called a green desert. They believed that for early humans, the jungle was a death trap. The protein is locked high in the canopy, hundreds of feet up. The vegetation is so dense you can't move. The soil is acidic, meaning it dissolves bones and destroys fossils. So the prevailing theory was that humans only entered the rainforest very recently, perhaps only in the last 10,000 years after we invented agriculture. But that view of the rainforest as a barrier is crumbling. The first massive crack in this theory comes from West Africa, specifically Côte d'Ivoire. There is a site there called Bete 1. It was originally excavated in the 80s, but recently, researchers went back with modern technology, specifically optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL. This technology allows us to figure out the last time a grain of sand was exposed to sunlight. What they found has completely upended the timeline. They found stone tools, heavy-duty picks, and cutting implements that date back to 150,000 years ago. Let that sink in. 150,000 years ago. That is the very dawn of our species, Homo sapiens. And these weren't people who were just passing through. Isotope analysis of the soil confirms that at that time, this region was a dense, wet, tropical rainforest. It wasn't a savanna mosaic, it was a deep jungle. And the tools they found weren't the standard savanna hand axes used for butchering gazelles. These were specialized picks, likely used for digging up tubers and underground yams, or processing heavy woody plants. This proves that right from the beginning, humans were not just savanna specialists. We were already experimenting with deep forest living, adapting our technology to extract carbohydrates from the forest floor. We were ecological generalists from day one. But if you think digging for yams is impressive, we need to travel across the Indian Ocean to Sri Lanka to see the real high-tech adaptation. There is a cave complex there called Defying Lanka. Excavations here have uncovered human occupation layers going back 48,000 years. Now, in the savanna, early humans used big, clunky stone tools. But in Defying Lanka, the technology is completely different. These people were manufacturing microliths. These are tiny, razor-sharp flakes of quartz and chert, some no bigger than your fingernail. Why would you make a tool that small? Because you aren't hunting ground sloths. You are hunting monkeys. The animal bones found in these caves tell a clear story. These humans were specializing in hunting arboreal monkeys, like macaques and langurs, and giant tree squirrels. If you have ever tried to catch a monkey, you know you cannot run them down. They are fast, agile, and they live high in the canopy. To kill them, you need speed, accuracy, and projectile technology. These microliths were almost certainly the tips of arrows or blowgun darts. This represents some of the earliest use of bow and arrow technology outside of Africa, and it was specifically developed for a vertical battlefield. Now, critics used to argue, okay, maybe they slept in the cave, but surely they went out to the grasslands to get their food. Well, science has an answer for that too. Researchers analyzed the stable carbon and oxygen isotopes in the tooth enamel of these ancient humans. Isotopes work like a dietary fingerprint. If you eat grass-fed animals, you look one way chemically. If you eat forest-fed animals and plants, you look another way. The results were definitive. The humans of Ephah had a pure rainforest diet. There was no mixing. For tens of thousands of years, these populations lived, hunted, and died within the closed canopy. They were fully adapted rainforest specialists. They even had sophisticated bone tools, used for working animal hides or plant fibers, likely to make clothing or bags to protect against the leeches, insects, and thorns of the undergrowth. This is what we call the rainforest culture, and it existed 45,000 years ago. This brings us to a fascinating comparison between us, Homo sapiens, and our archaic cousins, Homo erectus. We used to think Homo erectus was the ultimate traveler, the species that left Africa first, and they were. But evidence from Southeast Asia suggests that Homo erectus was strictly a creature of the open. In Java, as the climate changed and the rainforests expanded, swallowing up the grasslands, Homo erectus seems to have gone extinct. They couldn't handle the jungle. They were specialized for the open. But when Homo sapiens arrived in those same forests around 70,000 years ago, we didn't die. We adapted. We invented the blowpipe. We invented the snare. We learned to leach toxins out of poisonous yams to make them edible. This highlights the real superpower of our species. We aren't Savannah apes. We are Plasticity apes. We are context independent. When the environment changes, Homo erectus dies, but Homo sapiens invents a new tool. We can even see this relationship between forests and intelligence in our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees. For a long time, we studied chimps in open woodlands like Gombe, where they use simple sticks to fish for termites. But recently, primatologists have gone into the deep forests of the Congo Basin, into the Gualugo Triangle, and what they found there is the chimpanzee Stone Age. The forest chimps don't just use one tool, they use complex tool sets. They use a heavy puncture stick to break open a hard termite mound, and then a separate, delicate fishing probe that they have frayed with their teeth to extract the insects. This is sequential tool use. It involves foresight, planning, and manufacturing. It turns out that the forest, with its hidden foods and fortified insect nests, creates a massive cognitive demand. The forest forces you to be smart. The idea that only the open savanna stimulates brain growth is scientifically bankrupt. The complexity of the jungle drives innovation just as much as the open plains. So where does this leave the Savannah hypothesis? Well, most modern paleoanthropologists are moving towards something called the variability selection hypothesis, proposed by Rick Potts. The idea is that human evolution wasn't driven by a single environment, like a grassy plain. It was driven by chaos. The climate of the Pleistocene was incredibly unstable. It swung wildly between wet and dry, hot and cold. Forests became grasslands, grasslands became deserts, and then back again. The hominins that survived, our ancestors, were not the ones who were perfectly adapted to the grass. They were the ones who could handle the change. They were the ones who could hunt an antelope in the open morning, and then switch to hunting monkeys in the forest canopy by the afternoon. They could make a hand axe for an elephant and a microlith for a squirrel. They could handle the instability. This shift in perspective is profound. It means we are not fish out of water in the modern world. You often hear evolutionary psychologists say, we are miserable in cities because we are designed for the savanna. But the archaeology says otherwise. It says we are designed for diversity. We are designed to figure it out. We are just as at home in the sensory overload of a rainforest as we are on a golf course. It also forces us to rethink conservation. The green desert theory allowed us to view rainforests as pristine, untouched wildernesses. But we now know that humans have been managing, altering, and living in these forests for tens of thousands of years. The virgin rainforest is largely a myth. Indigenous peoples have been shaping these ecosystems sustainably for millennia and recognizing that deep history is vital for future conservation. To wrap this up, the savanna will always be a part of our story. It is where we learn to run. But it is only half the picture. The other half lies in the dappled light of the forest floor. It lies with the human crouched in the mud of West Africa 150,000 years ago, figuring out how to dig up a yam. It lies with the hunter in Sri Lanka, sharpening a piece of quartz to shoot a monkey high in the trees. These rainforest hominins proved that to be human is to be at home everywhere. The green hell was actually a green cradle, a crucible of innovation that taught us how to conquer the vertical world long before we built our first skyscraper. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online. If you enjoyed this deep dive into our hidden history, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.